Beijing responds to the situation in Afghanistan. Chinese officials describe the Taliban as more sober and rational than in the past. The U.S. is limiting passenger capacities for some Chinese flights. It comes after Beijing imposed similar limits on some American flights. Huawei faces a new lawsuit filed by an American company. It accuses the Chinese telecom giant of espionage and stealing trade secrets. A Chinese Communist Party official breaks the country's embezzlement record, taking $460 million. But the true figure could be even higher. And Chinese farmers who suffered flood damage receive little to no support from authorities. Only a few dollars given as compensation for a land lot as big as an NBA basketball court. Hello and welcome to China in Focus. I'm Evelyn Lee in for Tiffany this week. Beijing responds to the situation in Afghanistan following the Taliban's takeover this weekend. Chinese officials describe the militant group as more sober and rational now.
In a Thursday press conference, a spokeswoman for China's foreign ministry praised the Taliban, calling the group more sober and rational than last time it held power some 20 years ago. She described the Taliban's current practices as good, positive, and pragmatic, but didn't answer when asked whether the Chinese regime would recognize the Taliban regime or whether Beijing has been in contact with the group in recent days. But the apparent friendly gesture is going both ways. The same day, a Taliban spokesperson said China could contribute to the development of Afghanistan in the future. He made the remark during an interview with the Chinese regime's state-run TV broadcaster, CGTN. But as relations between Beijing and the Taliban warm, the U.S. is facing a more immediate concern. That is that American weapons could fall into the Chinese regime's hands. That's including gear like guns, night vision goggles, and even aircraft. For nearly 20 years, the United States has been providing Afghan forces with weapons, having sent over at least 600,000 to date. As Taliban forces seized many of the country's major cities in recent days, it collected those weapons and equipment left behind by fleeing Afghan forces. U.S. officials told Reuters that they expect the Taliban to keep and use most of those weapons themselves, but noted the arms could also be shared with rival states like China. Though one of the officials pointed out that the Chinese regime wouldn't gain much, even if the Taliban did decide to share. That's because Beijing likely has access to comparable weapons and equipment already. Besides weaponry, experts are voicing other concerns too. For one, Afghanistan's rare earth metal mines. Some suspect the Chinese regime will align itself with the Taliban in order to exploit Afghanistan's natural resources. The rare earth metals mined in the country last year are estimated to be worth up to $3 trillion. The materials are critical to much of modern industry and everyday life. They're needed to produce everything from airplanes and weapons to cell phones and laptops. China currently dominates the global rare earth market. The Chinese regime threatened to cut off supplies to the U.S. during the 2019 trade war.
The U.S. Transportation Department says it will limit some flights from Chinese carriers to 40% passenger capacity for 4 weeks. The department made the announcement on Wednesday. It comes after the Chinese regime imposed similar limits on 4 United Airlines flights.
The U.S. Transportation Department slapped limits on Chinese airlines following a similar move by Beijing. The order will limit U.S.-China flights on 4 different Chinese airlines to 40% capacity for at least a month. China told United Airlines earlier this month it would be imposing sanctions after 5 passengers who traveled from San Francisco to Shanghai allegedly tested positive for COVID-19. The U.S. government says China's circuit breaker policy violates the nation's air services agreement, placing, quote, undue culpability on carriers for travelers testing positive. They added that carriers have no means to independently verify positive test results alleged by Chinese authorities or determine where or when a traveler contracted the virus. United said it was pleased to see the U.S. taking action, quote, in pursuit of fairness in this important market. The Chinese embassy in Washington did not immediately comment. The 2 countries' agreement allows more than 100 weekly flights back and forth, although only a fraction of those are currently operating. The U.S. and China have sparred over flight services since the beginning of the pandemic. The latest limits come as many Chinese students head to the U.S. for the start of fall classes.
With the huge demand from Chinese students and the shortage of flights, ticket prices from China to the U.S. soared more than 400%. A U.S. company is suing Huawei. They're accusing the Chinese telecom giant of stealing trade secrets and spying. On Wednesday, California-based software company Business Efficiency Solutions, or BES, sued Huawei in the state's federal court. BES says Huawei stole classified data after working on a project together for Pakistan. The lawsuit also accuses Huawei of using BES's systems to install backdoors that allowed the Chinese company to spy on Pakistan. In 2016, Huawei hired BES to construct citywide facial recognition surveillance camera systems in Pakistan. Huawei marketed this system to the Pakistani government as a crime-fighting tool. BES claimed that Huawei requested that they create a backdoor in the surveillance system that allowed the Chinese firm to have access to Pakistan's national ID records, tax records, and criminal records. It claims that Huawei threatened to withhold payment to BES if they didn't do it. Huawei denies those allegations, saying there is no evidence of any backdoor. These citywide surveillance system projects are attracting criticism from governments and rights groups. They say it's a means of exporting China's mass surveillance practices to other countries. A group of U.S. solar manufacturers are urging the Biden administration to impose tariffs on China-linked solar imports. The group is known as the American Solar Manufacturers Against Chinese Circumvention. China plays a leading role in global solar panel production. The process involves manufacturers from different locations. Recently, some major Chinese solar companies have set up the final stages of their production in some southern Asian countries, such as Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand. The petition says the purpose of this shift is to avoid the tariffs set for made-in-China solar products. Thus, the group is asking for fresh tariffs to be imposed on Chinese products coming from these other Asian countries. The petition names some major Chinese solar manufacturers, including Longyi Solar, Trina Solar, Jinko Solar, and JA Solar. China's solar industry is feeling increasing pressure after the U.S. imposed sanctions in June. In response to the Chinese Communist regime's human rights abuses in Xinjiang, the U.S. banned some Chinese solar products and blacklisted 5 related companies operating in the area. The U.S. says they will only clear customs on products where it can be proven they were not produced using forced labor. U.S. Customs detained some sample solar modules belonging to company Canadian Solar when they were transported to the U.S. from China. Canada warned last weekend that the U.S. could detail all modules from China in the future. Beijing carried out large-scale military drills near Taiwan earlier this week. Some experts say Beijing wants to take this opportunity as the U.S. withdraws from Afghanistan to test the Biden administration. Others believe it's more likely a warning to the U.S. over its selling arms to Taiwan.
China carried out military drills near Taiwan on Tuesday. Warships and fighter jets performed the exercises off the coast of the island's southwest zone. But some suspect the action has more to do with sending a message than testing troops. As U.S. troops withdraw from Afghanistan, the Chinese Communist regime may be taking the opportunity to test America's resolve when it comes to defending Taiwan. Though a scholar from the Taiwan National Defense think tank says Beijing chose the wrong time to do it and made strategic mistakes as a result.
The withdrawal from Afghanistan is the U.S.'s grand strategic adjustment. Its purpose is to focus more on China.
Su says the CCP's suppression of Taiwan, both verbally and in action, will serve as a warning for the island to reinforce its military defenses. Another Taiwan military expert presents another angle. He says the Biden administration's recent arms sales to Taiwan triggered China's military drills.
The military cooperation between the U.S. and Taiwan in the last months greatly disturbs Beijing. So they sent out a warning, saying not to cross their red line.
But Li says he doubts the warning will serve much use. On top of the Chinese regime's military action, its Foreign Affairs Ministry also took action that same day, publicly criticizing the U.S. arms sale to Taiwan. Despite Beijing's multi-channel attacks, the expert says the current situation spells trouble for Beijing. That's because the threat China poses will help unite democratic countries and drive them to combat the Chinese regime.
A low-level official of the Chinese Communist Party has been convicted for embezzling hundreds of millions of dollars. Li Jianping was the party secretary of a working committee for an economic and technological development zone in Inner Mongolia's capital city. He had the authority to give permits to companies. According to Chinese media, in 7 years, he embezzled more than $460 million, which averages out to about $180,000 per day. Li broke the embezzlement record for CCP officials. The last record was from Lai Xiaomin with about $300 million. Li hasn't been sentenced yet. In the last 10 years, at least 50 CCP officials have been investigated or sentenced to prison, each for embezzling more than $15 million. Floods in China's Henan province devastated millions of acres of farmland. Farmers worry authorities aren't offering enough relief subsidies. Henan's Provincial Department of Agriculture announced that for every 7,000 square feet of devastated land, they will give farmers about $7 in relief subsidies. 7,000 square feet is roughly the size of 1.5 NBA basketball courts. One local farmer, Ms. Yang, tells the Epoch Times that $7 is far from enough support. She explained that that's only enough money to buy a bag of seeds. But without the floods, the equivalent amount of land could produce more than 1,000 pounds of corn. Despite being only $7, it seems authorities have yet to deliver on that promise. Another farmer, Mr. Li, tells the Epoch Times having subsidies is better than no subsidies, but that he hasn't seen a penny of it. He says he doesn't know anyone else who got the subsidy either. According to official data, the floods affected 14 million people in Henan, and more than 2 million acres of land have been devastated. China is celebrating 70 years of sovereignty over Tibet, and a celebration was held in Tibet's capital city. But as China celebrates, Tibetans are condemning it. They say China's takeover of Tibet was a grim moment in history. NTD's Don Ma has more.
On Thursday, in Tibet's capital city, Beijing held a grand ceremony celebrating the 70th anniversary of its takeover of Tibet by force. The ceremony is an exercise in propaganda that calls on Tibet to accept communist rule. High-level Chinese Communist Party official Wang Yang said in a speech that Tibet can only develop and prosper under the party's leadership and socialism. He also warned that external forces have no right to interfere in Tibetan affairs. And prominently displayed is a 4-story tall portrait of CCP leader Xi Jinping. China called it a celebration of the peaceful liberation of Tibet. But what many Tibetans call is the Chinese invasion of Tibet. In 1951, China sent its military to forcibly gain control of Tibet. That was after Tibetan leaders refused to accept Chinese sovereignty over the region. Tibetans have been severely persecuted under communist rule. Estimates put Tibetan deaths at between 400,000 and 1.2 million. This as a result of war, starvation, and repression. Tibet's elected parliamentary government based in India, the Central Tibetan Administration, condemned the ceremony. It said the peaceful liberation of Tibet claim is false, adding that the date marks a grim occasion in the history of Tibet. And as China marks this anniversary, Tibetans are protesting. In the U.S., Tibetan activists marched for 10 days from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C., demanding Tibet's independence. Don Ma, NTD News.
Is Beijing forcing people to get vaccinated? The regime says no, but local authorities are doing just that. Some residents in China tell us their experiences.
Beijing's tight authoritarian grip used to scare local officials across China. But when it comes to its vaccination policy, local officials seem to be openly disobeying Beijing's orders that all vaccinations should be voluntary. But local mandatory vaccination orders have appeared across Chinese provinces. Local citizens can either get the shot or face restrictions on their daily life, such as being banned from hospitals, schools, and nursing homes. In a city in Anhui province, city officials issued a notice earlier this week, saying starting Wednesday, the city will check proof of vaccination and ban unvaccinated residents from accessing public services. The notice says if unvaccinated people infect others, they will be held accountable. Similar notices also appeared in other Chinese cities. This seems to contradict what the regime's top authorities require. China's central officials and state news outlets all voice criticism of the local government's mandatory vaccination orders. Chinese health officials said last month that the basic principles of China's vaccination policy are informed consent and voluntary uptake, and that coercion or other forms of forced vaccinations will not be tolerated.
Although the National Health Commission says on the surface that it is voluntary to vaccinate, all levels of government are still forcing the people to vaccinate. They come after you from all areas, all ways in life. As long as you want to survive in this country, they will make you get the vaccine by controlling you in all ways.
Why does Beijing tolerate this? A health officer in Wuhan reveals that Beijing indirectly ordered the local government to do so.
It serves as a political task. Although it is not mandatory for the people, it is used as an assessment task to assess the government's ability to mobilize people.
A human rights activist in China's Hubei province believes that Beijing is likely shifting the blame to the local authorities.
The central government says it's voluntary, but it's under a condition. That is, 83% of the population must be immunized. Maybe Beijing ordered lower levels to achieve this figure to shift the blame to them.
As a result, local government officials are under extreme pressure to deliver on Beijing's vaccination goals. And they've tried, by all means.
I just got the news today that in some cities, if you don't get vaccinated, you can't even take a driver's license test.
A local resident from China's Hubei province says local authorities are taking vaccination measures to the extreme.
For some self-employed businesses, if you don't get vaccinated, the regime will close your shop. Some 80 or 90-year-old people who are seriously ill were also asked to get the shot. Some of them can't even get up from bed.
Ms. Chen added, people who are in poor health need proof from a doctor to show they aren't fit for the vaccine. But it's very difficult to get this kind of proof.
A Canadian judge reserved her decision on whether to extradite Huawei's chief financial officer Meng Wanzhou to the United States. She says that she will announce the date of her ruling in October. Associate Chief Justice Heather Holmes says she will likely announce her decision on October 21st. Meng was arrested on a warrant at Vancouver International Airport on December 1st, 2018. She's accused of misleading banking institution HSBC about Chinese tech giant Huawei's business dealings with an Iran-based company. The move put HSBC at risk of violating U.S. trade sanctions. If the judge rules to extradite Meng, Canada's Justice Minister will also have to agree. She would then be sent to the United States to face criminal charges. Beijing has warned of unspecified consequences if Meng is not released. Both Meng and Huawei have denied the charges. Japanese tech investor Softbank says it will continue to invest in China. But the company's founder says he will take a cautious approach. Masayoshi Son made the statement in response to reports that it would pause new investment in China amid Beijing's ongoing regulatory crackdown. A week ago, Son said he might pause investments in China for a year or two. That's when his company's profit dropped nearly 40% compared to the same period a year before. Son acknowledged the tough challenges he was facing after tech stocks turned volatile amid Beijing's clampdown on private enterprise, including the tech sector and private education companies. Son said he would take a cautious approach until it's clearer what the impacts of Beijing's new regulations will be. In spite of that, Son said he would continue to provide investment and support for Chinese entrepreneurs. As one of the world's largest tech investors, Softbank holds stocks of top Chinese firms, including e-commerce giant Alibaba, ride-hailing firm Didi, and TikTok owner ByteDance. The Cuban regime is further tightening control over social media. Those who post content that, according to authorities, damages the country's prestige will be deemed cyber terrorists.
The Cuban Communist regime announced Decree 35 on Tuesday. It bans the spread of messages and content the regime considers offensive or that incite mobilizations or other acts that upset public order.
This model, Decree 35, will demand an adequate, respectful, ethical, and truthful use of these communication channels.
The regime claims this is to clamp down on misinformation. It also provides a channel for Cubans to inform authorities about potential law violations. But many citizens and international human rights activists are outraged over the move, saying it would further restrict Cubans' freedoms.
These new laws come to reinforce the prohibition that already exists and legalize things that were being done outside of legal framework, such as the cuts of the internet service, etc. It is a threat to the freedoms and the citizens' rights, which is why it has generated so much rejection among the population.
Part of the decree also orders the state telecom's monopoly to suspend services for users who have sent messages or content that violate the rules. Even human rights nonprofit Amnesty International is paying attention to the tightened control.
It is seeking to limit the space where people can access information freely. Not only the access, but distribute and exchange information. It will be up to the authorities to determine what is false information, and information that seeks to harm the government or against the constitutional precepts.
The Americas director at Amnesty International says this new decree formalizes digital repression, and the Cuban regime is once again seeking absolute control of a monopoly on internet access. Cuban officials have long argued that dialogue is permitted only within the revolution. The Cuban foreign minister wrote about the decree on Twitter, saying we have the right to exercise national sovereignty over cyberspace.
And that's all for today. But before you go, we have a short announcement. We have our premiere at 9:30 p.m. from Monday to Saturday on TV and our YouTube channel. NTD is available on many platforms, including cable TV, satellite, and over-the-air TV across the U.S., and it continues to grow. Please check out ntd.com/TV. Type in your zip code to find all the ways you can watch our show. That's ntd.com/TV. Thanks for watching. See you next time.